"You're trespassing on HOA property," she shrieked, waving her clipboard as though it could strike me down. "Pack up your junk and leave now." That's how my peaceful morning at the cabin shattered. Coffee still warm in my hand, the lake calm as glass, when Karen came storming up my porch like a hurricane in heels. Her red suit practically glowed under the sunlight, and her lips curled as if she was about to devour me whole. I didn't even flinch. To her, my cabin was an invader, an eyesore, a crime against her self-declared empire. To me, it was home, my father's legacy, my retreat from all the HOA nonsense she embodied. She thought those flimsy papers gave her power. She thought I'd back down, pack up, and run. What she didn't know was that the real law was already inside my cabin, sipping tea by the window, my mother. And she wasn't just a mother. She was a judge. Before the chaos unfolds, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and what time is it right now. When I first pulled my truck into the gravel drive that led up to the cabin, it felt like stepping back in time. The place wasn't flashy, not the kind of modern rustic you see on real estate magazines. No, this cabin was old, bones and soul. Weathered cedar siding, a stone chimney my father had stacked himself, and a porch that creaked in rhythm with the wind. To most people, it looked like nothing more than an aging relic tucked between tall pines and a quiet lake. To me, it was sacred ground. This cabin had been in my family for decades. My father used to bring me here every summer, fishing trips at dawn, the smell of bacon frying on a cast-iron skillet, evenings where the fireflies lit up like lanterns over the water. When he passed, I inherited it not just as property, but as a piece of him. The HOA didn't own these woods, they never had. The boundaries of their little suburban kingdom ended a mile down the road, yet somehow they acted as if every tree, every rock, and every blade of grass bent to their will. I came here to escape all that. The city was a grind, the neighborhood committees and petty rules like a slow bleed on my sanity. At the cabin I could breathe. No approved paint color nonsense. No letters threatening to fine me because my grass dared to grow an inch too high. Out here, if I wanted to sip coffee shirtless on my porch, no one wrote me up for indecency. If I wanted to fix my boat engine until midnight, nobody called it a noise violation. The only rules here were the ones written by nature, and those I could live with. The first 2 days were bliss. Morning mist on the lake, the hum of cicadas at noon, and quiet nights where the stars looked close enough to touch. I stacked firewood, mended a section of fence, and even found the old rocking chair my father had carved initials into when I was a boy. For a while, I convinced myself that the HOA world couldn't reach me here, that their claws couldn't scratch this far into the pines. But Karen had other ideas. Even before she came storming up my porch in that red suit, there had been signs. A shiny black SUV parked at the end of the road. A drone buzzing a little too low over the tree line, its camera eye blinking as it hovered above the cabin roof. I'd catch the faint echo of voices carrying from the road, muffled arguments about boundaries and compliance. I knew the type. The HOA always sent scouts before they attacked. What bothered me wasn't just the intrusion, it was the arrogance. My deed was clear as daylight. The cabin stood outside their jurisdiction. The HOA's bylaws didn't apply here any more than they applied to the moon. Yet entitlement doesn't need a reason, it feeds on itself. Karen, their self-proclaimed queen, had built her entire identity on controlling other people's lives. She wasn't about to let a piece of property slip out of her grip, especially not when she could smell blood in the water. I still remember the first time I laid eyes on her years ago at a community barbecue. She didn't greet people, she inspected them. She didn't converse, she interrogated. Every smile she gave was the sharp kind, like she was measuring you for a box you didn't fit into. If you painted your shutters the wrong shade of beige, she'd be at your door with a violation notice before the paint even dried. If your kid's basketball hoop leaned into the cul-de-sac by an inch, she'd threaten fines. Power wasn't a burden to her, it was fuel. And now that same energy was pointed squarely at my cabin. When I arrived this trip, I knew she'd eventually show up. I didn't know when or how, but I knew. And as much as I cherished, the quiet part of me was itching for it. I was tired of bullies winning by default, tired of people like Karen thinking the world bowed just because they shouted loud enough. The cabin wasn't just my sanctuary anymore, it was going to be my line in the sand. That first evening, as the sun dipped behind the pines, my mother pulled up in her silver sedan. She wasn't there as backup, at least not yet. She came because she loved the place too. For her, it was a second home, a retreat where she could shed the weight of her robe and the endless stream of cases and hearings. She wasn't a woman who let herself rest often, but at the cabin she allowed it. Watching her step out of the car, hair graying but eyes sharp, reminded me just how strong she was. She carried authority without even trying. "Still standing strong," she said, running her hand along the porch railing. "Your father would be proud." I nodded. "It's ours. Always will be. We settled into a rhythm quickly. I cooked, she read by the window, we traded stories that had nothing to do with courts or committees. For 2 days, we were just mother and son at the lake. And if Karen hadn't decided to make her move that morning, maybe we would have had a whole week of peace. But bullies don't know when to stop. They never do. The morning she came storming up, I was on the porch with my coffee, and Mom was inside with her tea. Karen's SUV kicked up a trail of dust as it pulled hard into the clearing. The door flew open and she stomped out like she owned the ground beneath her heels. Clipboard in hand, voice sharpened to a screech, she delivered her battle cry, "You're trespassing on HOA property, pack up your junk and leave now." And just like that, the fight I'd been expecting had finally arrived. Karen didn't just walk up to my porch that morning. She marched like a general on her way to a battlefield she thought she already owned. Clipboard clutched tight lips, pursed into a dagger of a smile. She radiated the smug energy of someone who had already written the ending of the story. Only problem was, she hadn't consulted me about the script. "You heard me," she snapped when I didn't move fast enough for her liking. "This cabin is not authorized. You're squatting on HOA-regulated land. Pack up or I'll have you cited for multiple violations." I leaned back in my rocking chair, letting the wood creak beneath me. I didn't even bother to stand. "Violations," I said, sipping my coffee. "Against what? The law of enjoying a Saturday morning?" Her face twitched. Karen didn't like jokes, especially when they got in the way of her performance. She tapped the clipboard with a manicured nail, as if the click itself carried legal weight. "Don't get smart with me. This property is subject to Pinecrest HOA guidelines. Your cabin doesn't meet code. No architectural approval, no landscaping compliance, no driveway permit. Shall I go on?" I squinted at her, then looked past her at the tree line where my father had once built a swing set out of nothing but rope and determination. "You can go on," I said, "but you'll still be wrong. This land was here before your HOA existed, and it'll be here long after your bylaws end up in the recycling bin." For a split second I saw something flicker in her eyes, doubt maybe, but she buried it fast under that painted sneer. Karen didn't come here to negotiate, she came here to dominate. "You think you're clever," she hissed. "But I have the board's full support. We already voted. This cabin has to go." That was when I laughed loud enough to make a crow squawk from the nearby oak. "You voted. That's cute. You all get together, nibble cheese, cubes, sip box wine, and declare authority over property that doesn't belong to you. What's next? Are you going to vote that the moon owes you dues?" Karen's cheeks flushed crimson. Her grip tightened on the clipboard until the edges of the papers crumpled. "You think this is funny? You'll be fined, sir. Thousands. And if you don't pay, we'll lean this place right out from under you." I put down my mug, finally standing to face her. I wasn't tall enough to tower over her, but I had something better: calm. Bullies thrive on reaction. Deny them that and they unravel. "Karen," I said evenly, "you can't lean what you don't own jurisdiction over. This cabin is outside your HOA map. The deed says so. Your threats are just noise." Her lips parted like a fish gulping for air. For a second she had no script, no line to throw. Then scrambling, she jabbed her clipboard toward me like a spear. "Don't test me. I've dealt with your type before. Stubborn, arrogant, thinking the rules don't apply. But let me tell you, when the HOA moves, it moves like an army." I smiled. "An army of what? Retired accountants and weekend gardeners. Don't make me laugh." That got her. The red in her cheeks deepened and her voice climbed higher. "You mock us now, but you'll regret this. You'll regret it when you're hauled out in handcuffs for refusing compliance." The sheer absurdity almost made me choke. Handcuffs. For what crime exactly? Not mowing my lawn diagonally, or maybe for daring to use a rocking chair without a permit. Behind her, a couple of neighbors had drifted into view, drawn by the noise. They stayed back, whispering, their phones held at angles that made it clear they were recording. HOA drama was better than television, and nobody wanted to miss Karen's latest performance. Karen noticed them too, and it only made her louder. "You're setting a terrible example for the community. People like you think you're above the rules, but the rules are what keep order. Without us, this whole place would be chaos." I gestured toward the lake, where the water shimmered in morning light, birds floated peacefully, and the world seemed anything but chaotic. "Looks like order to me. You sure it isn't you bringing the chaos?" That did it. Karen's voice dropped an octave into something venomous. "You will not win this. I'll bring the board, I'll bring security, I'll bring the law if I have to, but one way or another, you're gone." I tilted my head, smirking. "Funny thing about the law, Karen, it doesn't always do what you want it to. Sometimes it surprises you." Her eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" I shrugged. letting her stew in the ambiguity. Guess you'll find out. For a moment, silence stretched between us, broken only by the distant croak of a frog. She gathered her papers, crammed them against her chest like a shield, and stomped back to her SUV. The door slammed so hard it echoed through the trees. The neighbors dispersed, whispering and chuckling, already replaying the scene in their minds to tell others later. I returned to my chair, picked up my coffee, and let the peace settle back in, even if only temporarily. But I knew this wasn't over. Karen had retreated, not surrendered. She was already plotting her return, and she'd come back louder, angrier, and with reinforcements. And though I didn't show it on my face deep down, I was ready. Because she wasn't the only one who could bring backup. Inside through the cabin window, I saw my mother's silhouette. She had been watching. She didn't come out, not yet, but she had that look. A look that said she was already preparing her own response. And if Karen thought she was bringing the law next time she was in for the shock of her life, when Karen slammed her SUV door and peeled out of the gravel drive that first morning, I knew in my gut she wasn't done. Karen never walked away from a fight, especially not one she thought threatened her crown as HOA queen. The only question was how she'd come back and how big of a circus she'd bring with her. The answer came sooner than I expected. 2 days later, just as I was patching the roof shingles, I heard the rumble of multiple engines. Not the soft hum of neighbors' cars, but the throaty growl of oversized trucks. I climbed down from the ladder, wiping sweat from my brow, and there they were, 3 black pickup trucks rolling up my driveway like a convoy. Painted across the doors in cheap vinyl letters was HOA Security. I laughed out loud. Not because it was funny, but because it was so ridiculous. These weren't security guards. They were neighborhood tough guys Karen had wrangled into her little empire. They wore matching black polos, bulging with tattoos that snaked down their arms, and mirrored sunglasses that tried a little too hard to scream authority. The lead truck stopped, hard gravel flying, and out stepped Karen, red suit, sharp as ever, clipboard clutched like a weapon. She strutted to the front, her new army in tow, and announced in a voice that carried like a bullhorn, "You've been given notice. This property is in violation, and you're refusing compliance. So I've brought enforcement." Behind her, 2 of the so-called security guys crossed their arms, flexing biceps that strained against the fabric. Another one started pacing my yard like a junkyard dog, eyeing my tools and my boat like he was cataloging contraband. I crossed my arms, too, leaning against the porch railing. "Enforcement," I echoed. "What are you going to do? Fine me for fishing without a permit? Arrest me for owning firewood without HOA approval?" Karen's eyes narrowed. "Don't mock us. These men are here to ensure you vacate peacefully. If you resist, we'll escalate." One of the neighbors, Mrs. Davenport, shuffled into view from the road. She wasn't even trying to hide her phone. She held it high, recording like she was live streaming the circus. And she wasn't alone. 6 more people clustered at the tree line, whispering, grinning, some even sipping iced tea like they'd pulled up lawn chairs for the spectacle. Karen spotted them and predictably raised her voice. "You all see this? This man is trespassing. He's defying the community's rules. This cabin is illegal and will be demolished." That got a laugh from somewhere in the crowd. I couldn't help adding my own fuel. Demolished. With what, Karen gonna sick your polo shirt SWAT team on my chimney? Maybe they'll punch the porch into compliance. The security guys shifted uncomfortably. They weren't used to being laughed at. One of them muttered something under his breath, and Karen snapped her head at him like a drill sergeant. "Stay focused. Don't let him provoke you." She turned back to me, eyes blazing. "This is your last chance to cooperate. Pack up your belongings, vacate, or we'll take action." I stepped forward slowly, hands in my pockets, deliberately calm. "Karen, let me spell this out for you. This cabin is not under your HOA. You have no jurisdiction here. No matter how many matching shirts you buy, no matter how many trucks you roll in, you're still just trespassing on my land." That word trespassing seemed to hit her like a slap. Her jaw clenched and she sputtered, "How dare you?" But I cut her off. "No, how dare you? You storm onto my property, threaten me, try to intimidate me with your rent, a goons, and you think you're the law. Hate to break it to you, Karen, but all I see are bullies playing dress-up." The neighbors chuckled again, and I saw one teenager nearly double over from laughing. Karen's cheeks turned crimson. She spun toward the crowd, shrieking, "This is not entertainment, this is official HOA business." But by then she'd lost control of the narrative. Every word out of her mouth only made her look more unhinged. She snapped back to me, stabbing her clipboard in my direction. "You will regret mocking this board. I swear it. If you think you can hide behind paperwork, think again. Next time I'll bring the sheriff himself." I tilted my head, smirking. "Funny you should say that, because next time I'll have someone waiting too." That got her attention. "What's that supposed to mean?" I shrugged. "Guess you'll find out." For a moment, silence rippled across the clearing. Even her security guys looked uneasy, shifting on their feet. Karen glared at me, lips trembling, then spun on her heel. "We're leaving," she snapped at her crew. "But this isn't over." The trucks revved one after the other, tires spitting gravel as they turned back down the road. Karen's SUV followed, her red suit flashing through the windshield like a flare of rage. The neighbors burst into chatter the second she was gone. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others laughed openly, retelling the best lines already. A few even clapped me on the back as they wandered off, phones still buzzing with fresh video. I returned to my porch, sitting back in the rocker. I caught sight of Mom through the window again. She hadn't stepped out yet, but I could see her face. Calm, measured. But her eyes told me everything. They were fire. She didn't like seeing me harassed, and she didn't like watching thugs in fake uniforms stomp across our family land. And that's when I realized this wasn't just my fight anymore. Karen thought she was bringing the law next time. She had no idea the law was already sitting at my dinner table drinking tea and waiting for the right moment to walk outside. Karen never left things alone. If she lost once, she came back twice as loud. If she was humiliated, she doubled down. And true to form, just 3 days after her security parade, I heard the SUV again. Same crunch of gravel, same puff of dust, same engine revving like it wanted to scare me off the porch. This time she didn't come alone, but she didn't bring muscle either. She brought paper. Karen marched up in that crimson suit like she had the backing of the Supreme Court. Her heels clicked on the boards, and her hand held a fat manila folder stuffed so tight with papers it bulged at the seams. Behind her, 2 HOA board members trailed nervously, clutching clipboards of their own. They looked more like reluctant sidekicks than reinforcements, but Karen shoved them forward as though their mere presence gave her legitimacy. She slapped the folder onto my porch railing, scattering papers across the wood. There, she announced, chest heaving, official violation notices, legal citations, orders of compliance. "You're done here." I raised an eyebrow, sipping my coffee. "That's so funny I didn't know Office Depot sold official law by the ream." Her face twisted. "Don't get smart. These are legal documents drafted by the HOA's attorney." She pulled out a sheet with a dramatic flourish. "It says right here, failure to vacate within 7 days will result in fines of $500 per day, plus penalties for non-compliance." I took the paper, glanced at it, and nearly laughed out loud. It was written in Comic Sans, and under legal enforcement it actually said the HOA will take serious actions. That was it. No code references, no statute numbers, not even a proper letterhead, just bold words and threats. "Comic Sans," I said, holding it up for the neighbors who had already gathered at the edge of the clearing, phones in hand. "That's your big legal gun." A ripple of laughter spread through the crowd. Karen's cheeks burned. She snatched another page and shoved it toward me. "Here, proof of unpaid dues, 2 years' worth. You owe the HOA." I glanced at the numbers. They claimed I owed thousands in community fees for services like pool maintenance and common area landscaping. The nearest pool was 6 miles away, and the only landscaping near me was the grass I mowed with my own 2 hands. "Pool maintenance?" I asked, shaking the paper. "Lady, the only pool I've got here is the lake, and last I checked, God doesn't send you an invoice for filling it every year." More laughter. Karen's hands trembled as she rifled through the folder, tossing papers like confetti. "You think this is a joke? These are binding contracts. The board voted unanimously. We can take your property if you refuse." One of her own board members leaned closer, whispering nervously. I caught a few words. "Karen, I don't think this is enforceable." She silenced him with a glare sharp enough to slice stone. Then she jabbed a finger at me. "You think you're untouchable, but no one is above the HOA. Not you, not your family, not anyone." That last line struck a nerve. I stepped forward, folding the fake paperwork in half, then in half again, until it was a sad little square. I dropped it back into her folder like trash into a bin. "You don't get to mention my family," I said, voice low but steady. "This land was my father's before you were ever a blip on the county registrar. And right now my mother is inside this cabin. She doesn't scare easily. And she definitely doesn't scare at the sight of Comic Sans violations." The neighbors chuckled again, a sound that only fueled Karen's fury. She snapped her folder shut so hard the papers inside bent at odd angles. "Mock me all you want, but when I bring law enforcement, you'll wish you had listened." I tilted my head. "Bring them. In fact, I encourage it, because the law doesn't work the way you think it does." That line made her pause just long enough for a bead of sweat to trail down her temple. She tried to recover with a scoff. "You're bluffing." But I wasn't. I had the ultimate card, and I didn't need to wave it around in Comic Sans to make it real. My mother was already reading through the county's actual property maps inside building a case without even stepping onto the porch. Karen gathered her board members, snapping at them like they were soldiers falling out of line. "Come on, we'll escalate this properly," she barked, stomping back toward her SUV. Her heels clicked so hard against the gravel it was a miracle she didn't crack a stone. The board members trailed behind one of them, shaking his head like he'd just signed up for the wrong army. The SUV door slammed, the engine roared, and once again she disappeared in a cloud of dust. When the clearing settled, the neighbors laughed openly. One even shouted, "Nice paperwork, Karen," as she drove off. I sank back into my rocking chair, a grin tugging at my lips. She thought she was tightening the noose with her fake notices, but all she'd done was dig herself deeper. The more she waved her flimsy threats, the closer she came to a real showdown she couldn't possibly win. And when that showdown arrived, she wouldn't be facing just me. She'd be staring down the law in black robes. After Karen's little parade of fake paperwork, the clearing around my cabin fell quiet again. But it wasn't the same kind of quiet I'd come here for. This silence carried weight. Every creak of the porch, every rustle of the pine needles, every ripple on the lake reminded me this fight wasn't just about keeping a building upright. It was about something much bigger. That night, as the sun set in, streaks of orange over the water, my mother and I sat at the kitchen table. The table itself was old oak, scarred with decades of meals, laughter, and arguments. My father had carved it by hand when he built the cabin. The grooves of his knife were still visible if you ran your fingers across the wood. I found myself doing that absent-mindedly as Mom spoke. "She's not going to stop, you know," Mom said, her voice calm but firm. She wore that tone she used in the courtroom, measured, steady, unshaken by theatrics. People like her never stop until they're forced to. I sighed, rubbing the back of my neck. "I know, but it's not just about me anymore. This place, it's ours. Dad's, yours. If I let her bully me off this land, it's like letting her erase everything he built." Her eyes softened. For a moment, she wasn't the judge who'd sentenced hardened criminals or presided over bitter civil wars. She was just my mother, a widow who'd lost her husband but kept his memory alive in every log of this cabin. "Your father loved it here," she said. "He used to tell me the lake was the only place he could hear himself think. He wanted you to have that too. That's why he left it to you." I swallowed hard, staring at the reflection of the oil lamp flickering on the table. Memories flooded back, my father teaching me how to bait a hook, his laugh echoing across the water when I fell out of the boat for the first time, the way he'd sit on the porch and hum old country tunes until the stars came out. Every nail in these walls, every stone in the chimney, every board on the dock carried pieces of him. And now Karen wanted to stamp her clipboard over it like it was just another property line to redraw another trophy to claim. I clenched my fists. I can't let her take that from us. I won't. Mom reached across the table, resting her hand on mine. "You won't have to. She thinks she's dealing with another neighbor she can intimidate. She has no idea who she's really up against." Her eyes gleamed, and I caught a glimpse of the fire she carried in the courtroom. My mother wasn't just a woman with a title. She was a storm in human form, a force that could dismantle egos with a single sentence. And Karen was about to walk right into that storm. Still, I couldn't help but feel the weight pressing on me. It wasn't just about Karen. It was about the way power worked. HOAs weren't about community, they were about control. I'd seen them ruin people's lives with fines, liens, and harassment until folks gave up their homes just to escape. If I gave in now, I'd be one more story whispered at a backyard barbecue. "Remember that guy at the cabin? Karen ran him out." No, that wasn't going to be me. The next morning, I stood on the dock with my coffee, staring out at the mist curling off the lake. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. Peaceful, yes, but it felt fragile. Karen's shadow lingered even when she wasn't here. I thought about the neighbors too, how they whispered, how they filmed her antics. They were watching, waiting to see how this played out. Some probably hoped I'd lose just for the entertainment. Others maybe hoped I'd win because if someone could stand up to her, maybe they could too. The stakes weren't just personal anymore. This had become a kind of battlefield. If I held the line, maybe it would ripple beyond me. Maybe it would remind people that bullies crumble when you stop bowing. Mom joined me on the dock, her robe trailing slightly in the breeze. She wasn't wearing her judicial robes, of course, but she carried herself the same way, back straight, chin, high presence, undeniable. She handed me a folder. "I pulled the property maps from the county website," she said. "Printed them out. I also found the HOA's charter online. They don't have jurisdiction past mile marker 14. Your cabin is at 17. They're bluffing, and it's going to cost them." I flipped through the papers, my chest tightening with pride. "You've already built the case." She smirked. Let's just say I like to be prepared. I laughed, shaking my head. Karen has no idea what she's walking into. No, Mom agreed. She doesn't. And that's why we'll win. But son, she paused, her voice softer. Now this isn't just about proving a point. It's about showing her that some things can't be bullied into submission. Family, legacy, justice. Those don't crumble under a clipboard. I nodded the words, settling deep. She was right. For me, this was about Dad. For her, it was about principle. And for Karen, it was about power. That made the lines of battle clearer than ever. That evening, as we sat on the porch, the crickets chirping, I heard the distant hum of an engine again. My chest tightened, not in fear but in anticipation. Karen was coming back, and I knew she'd be louder, angrier, more desperate. But this time I wasn't just some guy in a rocking chair with a cup of coffee. I had history, family, and a judge sitting beside me. And Karen, she was about to learn that when you try to bully the wrong people, the cost can be more than you bargained for. By the end of the week, the air around the cabin felt charged. Not the good kind of charge you feel before a summer storm, something heavier, uglier. Every creak of the trees made me wonder when the SUV would come roaring back. Every ripple on the lake carried an undercurrent of anticipation. I didn't have to wait long. Saturday morning, the circus arrived. It started with honking. Not one horn, but several blaring in uneven bursts like a row of clowns trying to play music. I walked onto the porch, coffee in hand, and there it was, a convoy of cars crawling up the dirt road. SUVs, sedans, even a battered minivan, all decorated with laminated signs taped to their windows, HOA board, official business. I nearly spit out my coffee. They parked in a sloppy line across my driveway, effectively blocking it. Doors flew open. Karen emerged first, of course, red suit flashing like a warning light, clipboard clutched in hand. Behind her, half a dozen board members filed out, each one looking like they'd been dragged away from their brunch mimosas. They held folders, papers, and in one case, a bullhorn. Karen didn't waste a second. She planted herself in the center of the driveway, hands on her hips, and shouted, "This is an illegal occupation. You are ordered to vacate immediately." I leaned against the porch railing, letting the rocking chair creak lazily behind me. "Good morning to you too, Karen. Beautiful day for a coup d'etat, isn't it?" That got a murmur from the crowd that had already gathered along the tree line. Neighbors again, phones raised, recording every second. By now, Karen's battles with me had become the hottest show in town. Karen whipped around, waving her clipboard. "This man is defying community law. He thinks he can squat here, ignoring our authority. But today, we stand united." The board members shuffled awkwardly, trying to look important. One man, skinny, balding, with a tie that looked like it belonged to his father, raised the bullhorn. His voice crackled out in a nasally monotone. "Sir, this is your last chance to comply with the Pinecrest HOA guidelines. Failure to comply will result in immediate action." I raised an eyebrow. "Immediate action? What are you going to do, fine me for drinking my coffee too loudly?" The neighbors chuckled. Karen's face flushed crimson. She snatched the bullhorn from the man and bellowed into it. "You are a trespasser. We will call the sheriff to remove you by force if necessary." At that I smirked. "Go ahead, Karen. Call him. I'd love to have a chat." She faltered for just a second, the edges of her bravado cracking. But she recovered quickly, turning to the board. "Form the line," she barked. And like obedient schoolchildren, they did. The board members spread out across my driveway, clipboards in hand, like shields, blocking the path with all the intimidation of a picket line at a bake sale. One woman even unfurled a banner that read, "Protect property values," in glitter letters. I nearly doubled over laughing. Karen raised her bullhorn again. "This is your last warning. Vacate or face legal consequences." I walked down the steps slowly, coffee still in hand, until I stood just a few feet from her. My calm seemed to irritate her more than shouting ever could. I looked her dead in the eye. "Karen," I said evenly, "you keep talking about the law. But you don't have the law. You have paper printouts and glitter banners. You're not protecting property values. You're humiliating yourself." The neighbors laughed again, and one even shouted, "Tell her." Karen's voice cracked as she screamed back, "Don't listen to him. He's a criminal, a fraud. He doesn't belong here." I tilted my head, smirking. "Funny, because I've got the deed that says otherwise. Care to see it? Or do you only read things in Comic Sans?" Her jaw tightened. "You think you're clever, but I'll have the sheriff here any minute. And when he arrives, you'll be dragged out in handcuffs." I took a sip of my coffee, then lowered my voice so only she and the nearest board members could hear. "Karen, you're about to regret making that call." Her eyes narrowed, confusion flickering behind the rage. "What's that supposed to mean?" I shrugged. "Guess you'll find out soon enough." The tension hung thick. The board members shuffled, clearly uncomfortable. Even her die-hard supporters looked less convinced by the second. The neighbors recorded it all, their whispers buzzing like bees. Karen, desperate to reclaim control, raised the bullhorn again, shouting at the top of her lungs, "We are the HOA, we are the law here." That was the line. The one that sealed her fate. Because she was wrong, and very soon she was going to learn just how wrong. From the porch, I caught my mother's silhouette in the cabin window. She hadn't stepped out yet, but she was watching, waiting. She knew as well as I did the time was coming. And when she walked out, the whole game would change. For now, I let Karen stew in her illusion of power. She thought she was on the verge of victory, but in reality she was setting herself up for the biggest fall of her life. And me, I just sipped my coffee, savoring the calm before the storm. Karen stood in my driveway like a dictator on parade red suit, blazing bullhorn in hand. Her HOA board lined up behind her like soldiers in an army no one respected. She thought she had me cornered, thought she was on the brink of her greatest triumph. She had no idea the real storm was still inside the cabin. The screen door creaked open. Slowly, steadily, my mother stepped onto the porch. She wasn't wearing her robe, though. Heaven knows she didn't need it to command authority. She wore a simple navy blazer, her silver hair pulled back neatly, her gaze sharp enough to cut stone. In her hands, she carried a slim black folder, nothing flashy, nothing showy. But the way she held it made even the rowdy neighbors quiet down. Karen spun around, squinting. "And who are you supposed to be?" she sneered. "Another squatter, another trespasser." My mother didn't flinch. She descended the porch steps slowly, each one echoing louder than the last, until she stood beside me. The crowd hushed. Even the birds seemed to pause mid-song. "I'm his mother," she said calmly. Then after a beat, she added, "And I'm also a sitting judge for this district." The words hit like thunder. The crowd erupted in gasps. Phones zoomed in. A teenager muttered, "No way," as if he'd just seen a superhero reveal their identity. The HOA board shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between Karen and my mother. Karen laughed, but it was a brittle cracking sound. "A judge, please. You expect me to believe that? Anyone can say they're a judge. Where's your robe, your gavel?" Mom opened the black folder and held up her identification official, sealed and shining in the sunlight. "The kind of thing you don't argue with unless you enjoy digging your own grave. This is my jurisdiction, miss." "Morgan," she said evenly, "and I'm very familiar with the limits of your HOA." Karen's smirk wavered, but she rallied, snapping back jurisdiction. "Don't talk to me about jurisdiction. This cabin is within the HOA boundaries. We voted on it." Mom tilted her head, her expression calm, almost pitying. "You can't vote yourself authority you don't have. The county maps are clear your boundary ends at mile marker 14. This property sits at 17. Legally, it has never been and will never be under your control." She pulled out the deed neatly highlighted, every page marked with tabs. She read aloud, "Lot 17 lakefront parcel registered prior to the establishment of Pinecrest HOA." She closed the folder with a soft snap. "That means your so-called violation notices are null, your security threats are trespassing, and your attempts to extort dues could in fact be considered fraud." The board members shifted nervously. One of them whispered, "She's right." Another started backing away toward his car. Karen's face twisted. Her voice grew shrill. "Don't listen to her. She's bluffing. This is a setup." But the crowd wasn't buying it anymore. They'd seen the seal, the paperwork, the steel in my mother's eyes. This wasn't theater. This was real. Mom stepped closer, her voice firm, but not raised. "You've harassed my son. You've trespassed on private property. You've issued false legal documents. If I chose, I could have law enforcement here right now to take your entire board into custody. Is that what you want?" Karen sputtered, clutching her clipboard like a life raft. You can't. This isn't—" "Yes, I can," Mom interrupted, her tone razor sharp. "And the more you speak, the deeper you dig your hole. My advice, walk away now before this becomes more than humiliation. Because, I promise you, the law doesn't bend for your clipboard." Silence fell. The neighbors gawked, phones still rolling. The board members looked ready to dissolve into the earth. Even the Protect Property Values banner sagged, its glitter letters suddenly pathetic in the face of actual authority. Karen opened her mouth, but no words came. Her face was crimson, her hands shaking. She looked around for support, but none of her board members would meet her eyes. Finally, she screamed, the only thing left in her arsenal, "This isn't over." But everyone could see it was. She stormed back to her SUV, slamming the door so hard the horn honked. The board scrambled after her, climbing into their cars with the desperation of people fleeing a battlefield. Engines roared, tires spun, and just like that, the great HOA blockade dissolved into a pathetic retreat. The neighbors erupted in cheers. Some clapped, others laughed until they cried. A few shouted "Judge Mom" like it was a chant. And through it all, my mother stood calm, folder in hand, gaze steady. She turned to me, her voice low enough only I could hear. "That's how you handle bullies. Not with anger, with law." I nodded, my chest swelling with pride. "Thanks, Mom. Couldn't have done it without you." She smiled faintly. "That's what family's for." And as the sun broke through the trees, I realized the war wasn't just won, it was over. Karen had played her biggest card and lost to someone she could never intimidate. The queen of the HOA had just been dethroned, not by me but by the law itself. The convoy of HOA cars hadn't even cleared the bend in the dirt road before the neighbors erupted into full-blown applause. Phones were still raised, capturing every second, replaying the moment Judge Mom dropped the hammer on Karen. But while the crowd saw a spectacle, my mother wasn't finished. For her, this wasn't just about silencing Karen, it was about setting the record straight. She walked back up onto the porch, folder still in hand, and turned toward the cluster of neighbors. Her voice carried, not loud but sharp, each word cutting through the morning air. "What you all just witnessed wasn't community protection, it was harassment, it was fraud, and it was a violation of the very laws this HOA claims to uphold." The murmurs rippled instantly. The board members who hadn't made it into their cars froze in place. One woman, clutching her clipboard like a shield, swallowed hard. We didn't know," she stammered. Mom fixed her with that judge's stare, the one that could silence a courtroom. "Ignorance is no defense. You signed your names to fraudulent documents. You accompanied a woman who trespassed on private property with the intent to intimidate. That makes you complicit." A man near the back of the group raised his hand nervously, as if she were presiding over a hearing, which, in a way, she was. "Does that mean we could be charged?" Her gaze didn't waver. "Yes, you could, criminally, civilly, both." A collective gasp spread through the clearing. The neighbors whispered, some of them grinning at the sudden reversal. Karen had strutted in like a queen, but now her so-called board looked like a flock of chickens waiting for the axe. I leaned against the porch railing, sipping my coffee with exaggerated calm. "Told you paperwork matters," I said loud enough for them to hear. Mom continued flipping open the folder. She held up a page and read Pinecrest HOA Bylaws, Article 1. Section 4, jurisdiction ends at mile marker 14. She closed the folder with a snap. "Ladies and gentlemen, this cabin is at mile marker 17. That means every notice you've delivered here, every threat you've made, every fee you've tried to impose void. Meaningless. Worse, unlawful." The crowd buzzed. Phones zoomed in, capturing her words. You could almost hear the sound of reputations collapsing. One of the board members, a pudgy man in khakis, stammered, We were just following Karen's lead. She said she had legal counsel." Mom's eyebrow arched. "Then perhaps you should reconsider the wisdom of blind obedience, because she has now exposed every one of you to liability. And I promise you, if you keep pushing this nonsense, you won't just lose your positions on a board. You'll be facing a judge in a courtroom." Another gasp, louder this time. The board members exchanged panicked glances. Some looked ready to melt into the ground. A few stepped back toward their cars, muttering excuses. Meanwhile, the neighbors weren't whispering anymore. They were laughing at Karen, at the board, at the ridiculous display they'd all just witnessed. One man shouted, "Guess the HOA ain't above the law after all." Another added, "About time someone stood up to them." Mom wasn't smiling, but I was. This was better than television. Karen's SUV hadn't returned, but her absence made her look even weaker. Without her shouting orders, the board collapsed into disarray. The so-called soldiers of her empire were retreating, some muttering apologies to the crowd, others denying they'd had any part in it. The Protect Property Values banner was abandoned on the ground, glitter letters dulled in the dust. Mom raised a hand, silencing the chatter. "Let me be clear," she said. "This community deserves better. An HOA exists to serve homeowners, not to bully them. If your leadership threatens, intimidates, and fabricates laws, it's not protecting you, it's abusing you." The crowd erupted in agreement. Someone shouted, "Throw Karen out." Another yelled, "Dissolve the board." The momentum had shifted, and it wasn't subtle. I couldn't resist adding fuel. "Funny thing about power, I said it only lasts as long as people believe in it. Looks like the belief just evaporated." Mom turned to me briefly, her lips curving in the faintest smirk, then addressed the neighbors again. "I'm not here to run your HOA. That's your responsibility. But I will be filing a report with the county." Fraudulent documents, trespassing, harassment, all of it will be investigated. I suggest you think carefully about who you want representing you when that day comes." The board members nearly tripped over each other, retreating. Some fled outright, piling into their cars. Others stayed frozen, as if hoping invisibility would save them. But the damage was done. The neighbors began chanting, low at first, then louder. "No more Karen, no more Karen." The sound echoed off the lake, filling the air with something that felt like justice. I leaned closer to Mom, lowering my voice. "You realize you just started a revolution, right?" She shrugged, eyes still on the scattering board. "Sometimes revolutions are overdue." As the crowd dispersed, still buzzing with laughter and outrage, I felt the shift deep in my bones. The HOA had walked onto my land thinking they could crush me with clipboards and glitter signs. Instead, they'd been dismantled, stripped bare in front of the very people they'd ruled over. And Karen, well, somewhere in her SUV, fuming behind the wheel, she had to know her empire was crumbling. The tables hadn't just turned, they'd flipped completely, and I had a front row seat to watch the queen of the HOA lose her throne. The dust from Karen's SUV hadn't even settled before the neighborhood began to change. It was subtle at first, the kind of shift you can't see but you can feel in your bones. The board, once puffed up and strutting like peacocks, now slunk around with their tails between their legs. The neighbors who used to whisper complaints behind closed doors were suddenly emboldened, sharing stories openly about the fines, the threats, the intimidation. Karen's humiliation had broken something and set something else free. Over the next few days, I noticed how the gossip spread like wildfire. The videos people had taken of the confrontation went viral, locally pinging across group chats and Facebook feeds. Clips of my mother flashing her judicial ID were paired with captions like, "HOA gets destroyed by judge, Mom and Karen dethroned." Even teenagers in the area started mimicking Karen's shrill voice, shouting, "You're trespassing," as a running joke. At the corner store, the HOA board tried damage control. They sent out a mass email claiming miscommunication and promising to review jurisdictional boundaries. But the words rang hollow. Everyone had seen the truth with their own eyes. Their queen had no crown and their army had no teeth. One morning while I was chopping wood by the shed, Mr. Henderson from down the road stopped by. He was a quiet man, a Vietnam vet who usually kept to himself. He handed me a thermos of coffee and said, "Heard what happened. About time someone stood up to her. Wish I'd done it years ago." That hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just about Karen anymore. It was about people who had been silenced by fear, who'd swallowed their anger to avoid fines and harassment. My mother's stand had given them permission to breathe again. As for Karen, she vanished. For days, her SUV didn't prowl the streets. No clipboard sightings, no shrieking speeches. The gossip claimed she'd gone on vacation. Others whispered the county had called her in for questioning about fraudulent paperwork. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain: she wasn't strutting into my driveway anytime soon. The cabin, once under siege, felt like a sanctuary again. The porch creaked with the same familiar rhythm. The lake shimmered in peace. Mom sat beside me most evenings, sipping tea while I nursed a beer, both of us watching the sunset bleed into the tree line. "You realize I told her one night you didn't just save the cabin, you changed the whole neighborhood." She smiled faintly, eyes reflecting the orange glow of the horizon. "I didn't change it. The people did. They just needed someone to remind them that fear isn't law." I let that sink in, staring out over the water. For years, Karen had ruled like a tyrant, her power fueled by silence and compliance. But the second someone pushed back with facts, with law, with calm, resolve, her empire crumbled like sand under a tide. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't violent. It was simple, standing firm. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Sometimes bullies look unstoppable because no one calls their bluff. But when you finally do, you find out they were never that powerful to begin with. The war with Karen was over. My cabin was safe. The neighbors had found their voice. And the HOA, well, it was on notice. As for me, I went back to chopping wood, fishing off the dock, and sipping coffee on the porch. Because some victories don't need parades, they just need peace. And peace was exactly what my father had built this cabin for. Now, thanks to my mother, it would remain ours. Always. If there's one thing I learned from that showdown, it's this: power isn't real unless you give it permission. Bullies, whether they wear a red suit or wave a clipboard, thrive on fear and silence. They count on people being too intimidated, too tired, or too isolated to fight back. But the moment you stand firm, calmly, confidently, with truth on your side, their entire act falls apart. This cabin wasn't just a piece of land. It was my father's legacy, my sanctuary, and a reminder that family roots run deeper than any HOA boundary line. Watching my mother, my judge, my protector step out onto that porch taught me something I'll never forget. Justice isn't about shouting the loudest. It's about standing on what's right even when everyone around you is trying to push you off the porch. So if you're facing your own Karen, someone trying to intimidate you, push you around, or make you feel powerless, remember this story. Remember that the law, the truth, and your own resolve are stronger than any fake authority. Stand tall. Hold your ground. You may be surprised at how quickly the tables turn. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever dealt with a bully, an HOA, or someone who tried to control you unfairly? Share your story in the comments. I read them all. And if you enjoyed this tale of justice and revenge, don't forget to subscribe for more HOA drama every week. Trust me, you won't want to miss the next twist.